we go. So eclipse season, we have eclipses generally 2 or 3 times a year, depending. This is the second eclipse season of 2020, and it's really that first opportunity that we get for the next 19-year cycle. So this is the Sag-Gemini cycle of eclipses. We had a little preview of that in June, but this one coming up is the real big opening number. So eclipse season, generally speaking, is a time of turning points. It's a time of, it's somewhat of an anxious time, somewhat of a wonky time, because there's so much energy that's kind of coming through the consciousness all at once. It can create a little bit of unsettling feelings. It's definitely a turning point, and we're going to look at your, later, if we have time, the way I've structured this, I'm going to pull up charts of all the rising signs so that we can kind of give everybody a semi-personal reading to look at where all this is hitting. But, it's definitely this grand new beginnings and grand endings kind of moment. Okay, so I want to make sure that everybody can see the second slide, which says Gemini lunar eclipse. Okay, good. So this must be working. So the first eclipse in this series is the lunar eclipse on Monday. It is in Gemini. It's at 8 degrees Gemini. So we'll check everyone's, if you have your chart, which I think everybody on this call has had me read their chart, you would look to see where 8 Gemini resides in your natal chart. And that's the area that gets really lit up for consideration, for change, for transition. Now, this is an air sign. It is ruled by the planet Mercury, and this eclipse is very closely aligned with Mercury. It's in the mundane astrology, Mercury and Gemini are archetypes. I'm going to say archetypes and energies that rule the media, information, the markets, trade, transportation. And that's why when we have Mercury retrogrades, these are all the areas that kind of go insane. So during this eclipse, we can expect to see headlines and news around issues of broader communication issues, broader issues around, I would expect we're going to see, how profitable Black Friday was, for example. It may be surprising. Hi, Victoria. Just going to close that door. So what I'm going to do is look at, the United States and how these big alignments that we're dealing with in December, because December is a really, it's an epic month. It's sort of that grand finale of 2020 and the opening of the curtain to, I really want to say the next decade, the next 20 years, simply because we have that Jupiter-Saturn alignment. So it's a big paradigm shift. And so this lunar eclipse is really just the beginning of what's going to be a pretty interesting month. But in the United States, I think it's noteworthy to see where this 8-degree lunar eclipse hits. It hits right on Uranus. And Uranus, for those of you who've been studying astrology for a while, know that that's sort of the great awakener planet. It's the planet of chaos. It's the planet of change, definitely change. And it's the planet that can create a little bit of distraction. Now, I do think that, I'm sorry, I'm distracted myself here as I'm talking about this. I do think that we could get a little bit of information overload during this lunar eclipse. Because this moon is highlighting an area that has been highlighted periodically this year, Uranus, one of the things that might be is just this restless feeling among the populace. Having Uranus and Mars in the 7th house for the United States is a signature for our independent nature and our nature to be kind of rebellious. And we've certainly seen that with this, reluctance, the resistance to wearing masks and things like that. This lunar eclipse could highlight some of that. that piece of the Americans. You know, could also have some, we could see some headlines. I mean, we're seeing headlines every day about horrific numbers of COVID. This could just be more of that. However, I do think it's important to note this does activate the nodal axis in the United States. So this is a turning point that we make, and maybe it's a turning point in the health of the nation. I could see that. And the health of the economy. I mean, right now, and we'll see this through the charts when I'm looking at the United States in the rest of this presentation, we're a very precarious moment economically, even though the markets are kind of skyrocketing and people are making money. It's a volatile market. So with this lunar eclipse, we could expect to see some headlines that are maybe somewhat shocking, maybe somewhat unsettling. And my advice to a lot of people is to just try to titrate your exposure to the news during this next week, and go into your meditation practice. Really try to take good care not to get emotionally overwhelmed by information. So I pulled up Donald Trump's chart, and this hits him in a very personal place as well. So this lunar eclipse is right here. It's at 8 degrees. I've highlighted the sun in his chart because that's his chart ruler. And the sun is in a really uncomfortable placement to his Mercury, which is all about that Gemini mini stellium that he's got. So this is for him. This lunar eclipse is I honestly think it's highlighting a loss. It's highlighting anxiety for him. I think he is experiencing a lot of, I don't want to say mental breakdown, but Uranus is still activating his delusional, the piece of his personality that's somewhat delusional. And this alignment with the lunar eclipse to Neptune is it's like the fantasy is still going strong where he's concerned, even though subconsciously he knows that he's having to give up some power. I do want to look at Joe Biden's chart. This is a really interesting alignment here. It really is so close to Saturn in his chart. Whoops, that's Kamala. Saturn and Uranus in his chart. This to me is like highlighting his wisdom, his ability to telegraph integrity. So we all hope he does actually have integrity, but this is his ability, his PR ability to, shine a light on the fact that he is going to, rule with a certain amount of integrity. And I think that this lunar eclipse is a moment where, he's going to increase his visibility. He's going to continue to be more vocal. And I know he just spoke last Wednesday. I think we're going to see more of that. I am, and a lot of you that we've been talking about this, I am concerned about his health. Just because I know this transit Uranus is going to line up with Mars next summer. So I'm thinking that he is somewhat exhausted. I mean, why wouldn't he be? But I think he's definitely feeling the weight of, and I'm going to talk about this as we get into later in December, the weight of the responsibility that he's going to be taking on, the weight of the problem of this country that he's taking on. Not to say it's not a celebratory moment, but this lunar eclipse, I think, is a moment of really highlighting the gravity of the situation for him in a new way. And and he's saying this in his speeches of being that healer in chief. I do think that is something he genuinely feels, and actually astrologically is very well suited to be that transition and a transitional leader in a place of deep grieving that this nation has to go through next year, I would say, and the year after even. And then Kamala, I wanted to touch on her chart because this lunar eclipse is right in that first house if you're using the whole sign chart. And it's squaring her professional life, her reputation, her status, her stature, and squaring all this Virgo down here. So I suspect that she's in the process of trying to get her life in order and prepared for this new role. And it's kind of stressful. With a square aspect to an angle, there's a lot of tension, um, a lot of decision making that has to happen. And definitely for her, it's about showing up in this much more global public way, which I noticed is really highlighted when we get to the later December period and after the Electoral College certifies the election. Okay, so what would this mean for you individually? I think the lunar eclipse is definitely a shift in perspective. Gemini is all about perspective, how you think about yourself, how you think about the world. And again, it can create a little bit of too much information and too much thinking about the world. So that's why I say we want to take care not to spend too much time keeping moment to moment updated on the news, because it is more likely that you could get overloaded. Gemini is a sign of duality. Gemini is represented by the twins. And so Gemini lunar eclipse is a moment of duality, a moment of considering two paths, two ways of thinking, maybe the polarity of a situation, diametrically opposed opinions. I mean, we certainly have all of that. So this could reach some sort of heightened moment around this eclipse. It's definitely a time to listen and learn. Those are some really key words that go with Gemini. But rather than try to shout down someone who doesn't agree with you during this time, you really want to just step back and listen. And that could get you maybe further along than trying to argue your way out of a conflict or an emotional outburst. We could see some of those. That's generally a signature for a lunar eclipse. The lunar eclipse is about your emotional state. And when there's a full moon, it's generally a more heightened emotional moment. But with an eclipse, it's like heightened on steroids. And this is not a time to just speak before you think. Okay, it's more of a time to wait a second before you just go out with it. Now, the next eclipse is a solar eclipse. And this one is in the sign of Sag. It's at 23 degrees Sag. So if you know your chart, you would look for any planets or angles at 23 degrees Sagittarius. This is the time when the moon passes between the sun and the earth. And with this particular eclipse, it's a very jubilant vibe. Like, I'm actually really looking forward to that week of December 14th. It feels like, having that Electoral College vote on that day feels, it feels like a good news kind of experience where we are more able to really believe that things are going to get better, really trust that we can celebrate, really celebrate the moment. Sagittarius is a fire sign, so it's all about taking action and affecting change. It's a mutable sign. Mutable signs really like to make things change. They're more flexible, so there's just more in the culture. There's more energy for new things, for changes. It's inspirational. It does rule the judicial system, and it rules travel. Now, I don't think it makes sense to say that, oh, we're all going to be able to travel and there's going to be a vaccine and But I do think we're going to get good news around some of these things. So in the United States, this eclipse lands right in the first house. It's very closely aligned with Mercury. And it's opposite that natal Mars. The North Node happens to be there as well. So this is a real shift in identity, I think, for the United States. And that would make sense if our leadership is officially changing, which I suspect it will. And it does create, it brings up the polarity. So we can expect all those 73 million other people who did not vote for Biden to be activated, to be triggered around that time. Um, at the same time, I do think it's okay to be optimistic about this. It is in a trine aspect to Mars, and transit Mars is on Chiron. So this feels like a, whoops, sorry. I don't know if that's a sign or what. This feels like a moment of healing, a moment, definitely a moment of celebration, but there's a healing nature to that celebration. I think even folks that aren't, Biden supporters are going to be relieved to have that decision finalized, so that we can feel more grounded. But it does feel like, and this is something I think is more evident when we get to the December 21st shift, but our global status, our national our global reputation, international reputation is changing. A lot of us think that's a change for the better. This astrology is just more about the change itself. So I think I like this eclipse. I think it looks good. Now Donald Trump is not probably as happy on this day. This signifies a really significant turning point, that is letting go of a certain way of life, letting go of a certain way of being. And one that is, his insecurities are definitely triggered. They've been triggered all year, but this is a really big moment where they're triggered. This 23-degree Sag is quincunx his Achilles heel, the Saturn, Venus. His finances are probably still in bad shape. And then we've got, I actually think that the Chiron is maybe not what I meant to highlight there, and it was really more the Mars. I think it's interesting. One of the ways we could say this is hitting his chart is he making international agreements? Is he reaching out to someone internationally at this time? And I've seen some reports that are talking about him trying to make some deals with some of these nations that are supportive of him so that he doesn't drown in debt once he leaves office. But this is it's a very positive alignment with Mars. Mars is in a very positive alignment with his natal Mars. This is obviously not the last we're going to hear from him. But this eclipse does represent a turning point in his, in the way he feels about himself. I think he's probably feeling, when he's really in a moment alone, he feels pretty low, pretty much like he's, that loser that he was raised to believe he was. That whole narcissistic wound really gets triggered around that time. And the other piece of this is the moon represents our physical health. Having a south node solar eclipse on the moon can be that his emotional state, the stress of everything, may diminish his well-being. So he may experience some relapse or some health issues around this time. Now, Joe Biden's chart is much different because he's a Sag rising, like the United States. This new moon eclipse is in his first house. And, it's in a place of really pushing himself out there in a new way, taking on a new role. It's in a square alignment to his midheaven. So this is really, the tension of taking on this big leap, this new role. Because we've got Jupiter in a lovely alignment with his son Venus, and we've also got Venus there. These were the signatures that we looked at back in the summer when we were wondering if he would win, that said, oh, look, he's looking great the day that the Electoral College votes. He looks very popular. He looks very satisfied. He looks, like he's in a good place with life. So that all of that is really positive. And the fact that he's got this new moon eclipse and it's trine Mars here in the 5th, this is a really motivated alignment, so he's really, he's probably going to be, as we move through December, you're going to hear a lot more from him. He's going to be speaking a lot more. He's going to be sharing his plans a lot more because it will be more official. And he's really going to, be taking on the mantle of real leadership from the moment of that electoral college vote. That's how I would say. Like, yes, the inauguration is a whole other bag of worms, which I'll get to in the December presentation. But I think in December anyway, it's feeling pretty good for him. And then Kamala, all of this eclipse energy is in that area of her partnerships, her associations, and the alliances that she, that are, it's like right on her south node and the descendant. This is really a big turning point for her. It's a moment of destiny, destiny playing a hand. And this is all trine her moon. So she's probably feeling pretty exhilarated. That was the feeling that I was getting from all this fire, just feeling lit up with the energy of a victory, and very charged up. Okay, so what this would mean for individuals, I think it's a refreshing moment. I've been describing it as like a gust of air, a gust of new change coming in, feeling like all things are possible again, that sort of feeling. Sag is a sign that really needs a lot of freedom. And so that notion of freedom, of justice, that's another big Sagittarius theme. Those are going to be really activated in the consciousness. And so we may experience those wherever this is happening in our personal chart and our personal lives. It is this kind of restlessness building in us. And the other piece of this, and this is true even for some of the Gemini eclipse, but this whole cycle, the Gemini Sag cycle, I think really speaks to truth and justice. And what is the truth of the situation? So wherever this lands in your chart, what is the truth of the situation? And we may be asking ourselves, is it okay to trust that it's actually working out well? And my answer would be yes. Like, I think there's a place where this Sagittarius energy wants us to believe again, to renew our faith. So I think that's kind of how we might experience it personally. Now, what I love this little gif of Scarlett Johansson. She's a Sag, and her energy really seems to kind of infuse that vibe that she has, infuses the themes of that week of the 14th, where we're ready to really celebrate. We're ready for this grim time to be over. We want to, finally just go big or go home. Now, I don't know that that's what we need to do, but that may be how we are feeling, because we're not only going to have the Sag eclipse that week, we're also going to have Venus and Mercury in Sag. So it's a lot of Sag, and Sag is a big energy. It is can be kind of bombastic, can be kind of overbearing, but it can also be a lot of fun. So I can see that, that week is going to be a lot of parties. And then we get to this shift. Okay, so it's like we start the week with a solar eclipse that's so huge, and then we move into this epic historic shift, which it starts with Saturn moving into Aquarius on the 16th or 17th, depending on where you are in the world. And this is that first indication of a cultural shift that is going to carry us into not only the next couple of years, but this is the first indicator of this 200-year cycle that is beginning, because this is going to be the first time Saturn and Jupiter are in a new element in 200 years. It's the first time that Saturn and Jupiter will have been in the same sign of Aquarius, specifically Aquarius, in 700 or 800 years. So anyway, the Saturn energy is about our structures. It's about where we are tested. It's about that sort of area of integrity, where we ground ourselves in what's right and wrong. And I think we could see with Saturn in Aquarius, the test is now going to turn to all those industries and areas that are ruled by Aquarius. So the airline industry right away is one that's coming up a lot in astrology talks because it's an air industry. It's going to test the structures of the airlines, and you will probably see a whole new structure for airline industries when we get through this by the end of 2023 or the middle of 2023. This is that thing that we've been talking about that sort of declares the age of Aquarius. Astrologers are sort of divided as to whether this is technically the age of Aquarius. It's going to feel like it, though. I do think it's going to feel in the short term like this move towards more progressive thinking, restructuring the foundations of society so that they serve everyone and not just the privileged few. We're definitely going to see tests around our broad-mindedness, our open-mindedness. And so what I think this could be, and I'm going to talk more about this in December and January, but Saturn is going to be very strong next year. It's going to be squaring Uranus all of next year. So we are going to continue to see this battle between the new and the old, the conventional and the unconventional. We're going to continue to see this struggle for the old guard to keep its clutches on the culture, on the systems that we've had in place for the last 700 years. And you're going to see, the AOCs of the world rise up to challenge that at every turn. So, on the one hand, it's definitely going to be, I think, a more optimistic year. But I've had some clients say, well, I'm hearing other astrologers say it's going to be really hard. And that's what they're pointing to. I happen to be a more optimistic astrologer than some. So it's not a year without struggle, but it's nothing like this year. We will never have another 2020 in our lifetimes or anything near it. This next period of struggle is really the finally breaking down of the old, and the pushing through of the new, because we are, as a culture in the United States, we're having our Pluto return. It's just getting started. So these are themes that we're going to continue to see. Okay, and then the big news that I can't wait for as an Aquarius is Jupiter enters Aquarius on the 19th. So Monday on the December 14th, we have a lunar eclipse. Wednesday, we have the Saturn moving into Aquarius. And then Saturday of that week, we have Jupiter enter Aquarius. This is jubilant. This is exciting. This is scientific innovation. Some astrologers are predicting, or hopefully predicting with a hopeful mind, that we'll have some kind of vaccine clarity around this time, that before the end of the year, you may be able to expect to hear some good news around how they're going to distribute a vaccine and when it's going to be available, and how it's going to change things for us. The other big piece of Jupiter and Aquarius for next year is Jupiter. Anywhere Jupiter lands in your chart, that's where you have good luck. That's where you have expansion. That's where you are feeling optimistic and hopeful and a sense of well-being. And Aquarius is the sign of astrology. So I do think you're going to see more astrology in the culture than we've had in maybe ever, just because we'll have Saturn and Jupiter there. At least that's what I'm hoping. So this is the Great Conjunction. This happens on Monday, the 21st. So this is like an epic week that we have, that week of the 14th. And, I think that for all of us who have been struggling all year, and I've been pointing to this week, just hang on to this week, that we will see some real significant shift happen that feels optimistic, that feels good. The last time we had Jupiter and Saturn conjunct was in an Earth sign in Taurus. It was May 2000. So those of you who were around in that era, remember that was the time that we were getting the setup for 9/11. I'm not saying we're going to have anything like that now, but what I can say is that this Jupiter Saturn conjunction is like the bookend to that one. So it was this 20-year Earth ruled period where we were sort of on a trajectory in the, in the 90s and before that. So when you look back to the last time we had this conjunction in an air sign, it was 81. So from 1981 to May 2000, we were actually on a different trajectory as a culture. And then 9/11 happened and we all went, everything went retrograde. Everything went back to the old way of doing things with the Bush administrations. We had this little window with Obama, but then we've had Trump. So it was like, this 20-year period has been sort of the final rule of the old guard. And now things are going to start to look, we're going to see technology begin to advance in a new way. We're going to see more progressive politics, more progressive laws. The trajectory that we had started or just really got a taste of in the 80s and 90s comes back around, and you see more of that air vibe, intellectual, progressive, what do I want to say? Other keywords for the air signs, so societally more broad-minded, open-minded. Sorry, hold on a second. So, I just think this is interesting. And then the last time these two planets met was in the 1400s. And that was the beginning of, yes, we had some really scary things going on there, but we also had, the Renaissance. It was this period of creative breakthrough, which we're going to continue to see that grow the more we get into this next decade. And it was the era of the Magna Carta, this idea of individual freedoms. That's going to be really huge again. I mean, not that it hasn't already been huge, but we've been more in this sort of material wealth, this area of earthbound kinds of pursuits, where it's all about what your material wealth looks like. And the next phase, this next 200 years, is going to be more about what are your ideas. The currency becomes your intellectual capacity, your creativity, your contribution to society, rather than how much money can you accrue, kind of thing. So this is another thing that I reference from an astrologer I follow, called a guy named Ray Merriman. He's a master astrologer, and he's a financial astrologer. And one of the things that he had mentioned in his recent newsletter is that we'll see these investigations and inquisitions. I know a lot of us are wanting to see Donald Trump, have to answer for his crimes. I think he probably will in some way. May not be in the way we all hope, but I don't think that his legal problems are going away. I do think we're going to see China continue to be the world power, and the United States is going to change. It's not going to be, the same kind of world power that it was. And, the values, that's what I was describing as, values shifting in such a dramatic way from, how can we pillage this earth to meet our material needs, and rather how can we preserve what we have and serve all of humanity fairly. Those become, the more dominant cultural demands. And I do think we'll see that debt, college debt, those kinds of things, debt burdens. We might even see reparations in the next 20 years. So it's going to be an exciting time. It is going to be somewhat, sometimes the change may feel jarring, but I think overall it is going to be a liberating time. More freedom and individuality, communities that work together better. That's a big theme. Saturn in Aquarius is really going to ask us to look at how our communities, like our neighborhoods, not even the, state or national level, but neighborhood level, how are we working together to sustain each other? You could see yourselves getting more involved on that local level. And then the rest of this, yeah, and definitely more of a democratic socialism vibe than a capitalist vibe. The last 20 years have been sort of the death throes of capitalism. And now we're moving into that more democratic socialism, whatever that's going to look like, whatever the American version of that is. So yeah, so traditional versus radical. This is the Jupiter-Saturn square that I mentioned that we have coming up in 2021. Periodically, it will be at exact points of exactly square, but its influence is going to be felt all year long, and so we can expect more protests, more uprisings, the government versus the people, old versus new, traditional versus radical. So I'm hoping that, you know, and my dream is that we get the Senate gets flipped, but I'm not sure of it. I'm not 100% sure of it. I have looked at the charts of the candidates in Georgia, and I didn't get a really clear picture of a winner there. So it's probably going to be another nail biter. And we'll just have to see. I'll cover that in more detail when we get into December. Okay, so the Great Conjunction and how it's shifting the United States, it's really changing that area of community and the way we think about our communities, the way we think about structuring and serving the people, you know, on the local level. Again, that Saturn is going to, by 2023, I believe, become conjunct with the moon of the United States. That's a significant moment. And that'll be probably somewhat of a difficult year, but we don't need to go into that right now. But the fact that these two planets are moving into the same sign as the moon of the United States chart does say that it really is a year or 2 or 3 years of looking at how the people on the ground are being served, the common people, the common man, the working people, and how can we restructure things so that they are sustained. It's in a nice alignment to these other angles of the United States chart, which to me says this is a change and a dramatic shift that benefits our reputation in the world. That our status is, you know, not 100% regained, but we definitely are better regarded by the world and not at odds with or in a tense alignment with the rest of the world. Now, the one thing that I did see that wasn't super comfortable is, again, the economy, the finances, and you don't have to be an astrologer to see that kind of piece being troubling next year. But I do think that this shift, at least in December and early January, we could see maybe some market corrections, some kind of uncomfortable adjustments there. You know, but for the most part, it does feel like a celebratory moment in the United States. It's, you know, trine that midheaven. It's in a sextile with Mars here in the 5th house, which is all about celebration and healing and feeling like we are ourselves again, like we're feeling more like, you know, who we are as a country is reflected in our leadership, that kind of thing. And then I was going to quickly look over Donald Trump's chart. Now, and this is why I'm like, he's not going away anytime soon, because these two planets are now above the horizon in his chart. And at least in the whole sign system. And they're going to be trining eventually his sun. You know, I don't think he's going away. In the short term, you know, he's oh God, I feel like he's just going to continue to challenge the leadership. That would be one way I could see that, you know, that he continues to challenge to try and get attention to maintain his status. The other way I could see this going, One of the things I thought was interesting is that I think when this shift takes place, when it becomes official that he's no longer in charge and can now just start blaming people in a much more strong way and not have to take any responsibility, he feels, not that he's ever taken responsibility, but it's easier when you're not, the next president. He feels a sense of freedom. I do feel that. That having Jupiter in his air sign like this and having it in a sign complementary to his moon, he's just going to be feeling freer to be kind of a jerk and be himself, which is not super nice. So any way that he has been inhibiting that true rabble rouser, disruptor, even though it's been limited, that's completely out the window. And he's going to probably feel much more entitled to just kind of let it rip with all the bitterness and all the litigiousness that he can manage. Yeah, so let's move on. I'm going to be looking forward to not talking about him. So Joe Biden, when we're looking at this shift, again, he's got a chart, very similar to the United States because it's another Sag rising chart. And although his midheaven is in Virgo, he does have this Neptune here, which having that trine looks like a dream realized. That this is his dream come true. We all know he's run for president like 6 times or something insane. And it's also trine Uranus in his 7th house. So he also sees himself as somewhat of a change agent, even though he's trying to make it clear that we're not at war with each other, we're at war with the virus. He does have some progressive things that he wants to that are fired up by this shift. I think this also represents his relationship to the public, and that public being, again, we're extremely divided as a nation, and he is enemy number 1, according to 73 million people or whoever. So yeah, I think he's definitely going to feel that challenge and feel that sense of conflict, but at the same time, he's exhilarated by it. I think there's a part of him that feels very well suited to this moment. And again, the only thing I'm really concerned about is this sky. And that's because that Uranus is going to get squared from the 3rd house. And that's just a lot of tension and a lot of stress that could cause some sort of circulatory issue, like I'm not really sure. I'm not an expert in medical astrology, but I'm going to be looking at that very closely as we move through next year. Because some of you have pointed out, and I think we mentioned this in another presentation last summer, that every president for the last 200 years or something that was elected during a Saturn Jupiter alignment did not live out the term. And so a lot of astrologers are like really looking closely at that. Is this going to be true this time? Because it's not always true. It wasn't true in Reagan's case. It wasn't true in second Bush. But there were attempts on their life, on both of their lives. So yeah, so it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward there. And then with Kamala, I never say her name right. This shift moving into the 9th house and it's basically a square to her sun and her Mercury. This is a tremendous change of, philosophical shift, the influence. That's how I saw it for her, that her influence becomes so much broader naturally. But it is a tense moment of change. This is a huge responsibility they're taking on. And so with the joy, or the joy of the victory, also comes the enormous weight of responsibility that they, and the heavy lifting that they both have to do. Now, I think she's going to be sort of a press darling. That's what I suspect. And I know we've talked about the possibility of her winning or becoming president. I think that's a real possibility as well. But she's in a good spot. She's in a really good spot, really charged up. and definitely feeling the winds of change, and having kind of at her fingertips the ability to affect, the laws of the nation. I mean, that ninth house, and she's a prosecutor. I think she really feels that. I think she's going to be one of these really involved vice presidents, in a much bigger way than maybe we've ever seen. But I'm sure she's got a lot of, what is the word I want to use? She's got a lot of ideas that she's ready to put forth, and she's just chomping at the bit. That's kind of how I see this. Okay, so what would this mean for the individual? Again, a once in a lifetime shift in priorities from that dark, grim, and sort of self-serious, pragmatic, conventional Capricorn into the innovative, the individual, the progressive, the somewhat chaotic space of Aquarius. So anywhere the Aquarius lands in your natal chart, that's where you're going to see this once in a lifetime shift. Tests of reinvention and experimentation, and that's Saturn and Aquarius mostly, but it's also Jupiter exaggerating Saturn and Aquarius. So all of the areas that, all of these laws that we've passed that have been Aquarian-like, that bring rights to the individual to sort of do what they will do, those are going to be tested. And I think, we're already seeing that. But the Saturn in Aquarius period is going to be a moment of really making sure those laws are sustainable and restructuring them so that they are. Creativity, individuality, humanity. So it's hard to talk about Aquarian shifts in an individual way, because they are like the cultural becomes the personal in this situation. So in a lot of folks' charts lately, I've been noticing how this cultural shift has personal ramifications. And I think we're all going to experience that in some way. Those signs that are in direct conflict with the Aquarius decan are going to feel it in a more tense way than those that are in a trine or a sextile alignment with the Aquarius decan. But anywhere it shows up in your chart is going to be a place of renewing your sense of creativity and your belief in the ability to affect change. That's a really big one. Oh, so that's it. I guess I finished that up faster than I expected. And what I thought I could do, let's see, we started at 12:30, is go through charts, but use the rising signs rather than individual charts, because I wasn't sure who was going to be on the call today. And I don't know if that works for everyone. If so.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
So thank you, Lisa. So let's do this. And that's Lindsley's chart, because we just did her chart. So I'm going to do Aries and Aries rising first. I did make a note of all the rising signs that I had. I noticed a few people joined later. So what I'll probably do is just make sure we do all of the signs. So Aries, Aries rising. I know if Victoria's around, she's that Aries rising. This is, and let me just back this up to the 21st. I'm going to talk about, hold on one second. Let's talk about the eclipses. And yeah, let me back it up to, I'm going to do the week of the 14th for everybody. How about that? Because that's the most dynamic week. And there's just so much to talk about that week that's going to affect a longer period of time. Okay. All right, so Aries and Aries rising. The first thing I'm looking at are the eclipses. And those are happening in that complementary Sag-Gemini sector. So whatever is shifting and changing for Aries and Aries rising is happening in that area of perspective. How do I change the way I think about a situation? How do I begin to ask myself the right questions and shift my perspective on a situation so that I feel more capable, more motivated, more like having a renewal of faith in myself. These do this eclipse series with the lunar eclipses and the north node eclipses happening in the third house feel like a refreshing change, feels like a moment of um, believing in yourself, really. And this also could be that you re-engage with your community in a new way, having the lunar eclipse here. Um, that you get more motivated even to get involved in local politics, maybe. I mean, Gemini is a very political energy. So this could be something comes up for you around that time that feels like a worthy cause to invest yourself in. With the new moon solar eclipse in the ninth house, this is really about your beliefs, your broader beliefs. The other piece of this could be that it has to do with teaching and learning, engaging in a new curriculum for life, or just maybe going back to school to learn a new skill. But definitely something that broadens your horizons, something that's much more in line with, how you would like to see the world. Maybe affecting change in a way that um, is really invested in the broader culture. So you have the opportunity. I think one of the key takeaways would be getting more invested and involved in your community and in how that community is affected by the broader world, and vice versa. And the other piece of that would be broadening your mind through teaching or learning. The other huge thing that's shifting that's complementary to the eclipses is the Jupiter-Saturn into Aquarius. And for you, that is these two coming into the 11th house. So your networks, your friendships, your goals are really changing. And they're in a better alignment to the way you see the world. They're in a better alignment to how you want to participate and engage with the world. So it feels like a cultural shift again that is bringing you more a certain level of comfort, and feeling like even like you have a bit more control or ability to engage in a more effective way. Um, I mean, this really is a time for Aries rising to broaden your circle, to meet new people, and to look at your friendships and see how you want to restructure those or re-engage with those. So that's kind of how I would see the Aries rising being affected. You have any questions on any of that? No? All right, so I don't have any Taurus risings, so I'm going to skip unless there's a Taurus rising that just joined. I didn't see any Taurus. I'm going to do Gemini rising. And this is true for Gemini suns as well. So Gemini this is a really complementary shift, both the eclipses and the Jupiter-Saturn. Because they're both in complementary elements to the Gemini decan. And the eclipses for Gemini and Sag are really about identity and partnership. How can I be myself? What do I need to change about how I'm showing up in the world so that I can be in a more balanced partnership, so that I can be more visible. Also, this could be that you are ready to show up in a new way, and be recognized in a new way. The eclipses in the first house often can be changing your physical appearance, renewing your commitment to your own health and well-being, looking at your behaviors and how those need to be changed to fit into this new person that you see yourself becoming. Those are, really, it's a very dynamic year next year for all Gemini Sag folks because of that. Um, there is a need to let go of some partnerships that are not serving that feeling of authenticity. So, because the South Node is in the seventh house, that is the place of release. The North Node is that place of becoming. So, as you step into a next level version of yourself, there are some partnerships that may not live through that, that may no longer serve that part of you. The other big piece, again, is this Jupiter Saturn, and it moves into that area of belief systems, of teaching, of expanding your horizons. This is also long distance travel, and and the law. So I know, like, for example, Andy, you're Gemini rising and a lawyer. This is significant for folks that work in the law because it becomes a moment of progressive um, themes and humanitarian efforts being made through laws, through the legal system, and that the legal system serves your efforts. So it's a positive. It's a positive for any attorney who happens to have a lot of air or fire in their chart. It does suggest a real shift in belief systems, a shift in perspective. And again, this speaks to the cultural shift that happens to align with your own personal politics, your own personal worldview. And it could be that you begin to see more ways, more alliances that, let me see. It's almost like you're learning from a whole new group of people is kind of what it feels like. That ninth house is a real, if we were able to, for example, travel long distances, I would say, oh, you're going to be on the road all year long. But because Saturn is there too, I'm like, well, I can see you maybe speaking to, having relations with overseas entities. I don't know how likely it is to actually get there. But there is a real international component that comes in, a cross-cultural component that comes in. What else do I want to say about that? Any questions for any of the Gemini folks on any of that? No? Okay, so let's move to Cancer, because we have, I think, at least 3 Cancer risings on the call. Put that there. So Cancer, you all have had this heavy duty energy in the 7th house all year long, and now that finally moves out of alignment. So a challenging situation in partnership and identity is now lifting. You won't have the same sort of heaviness and weightiness there. The eclipse cycles are now moving into the area of surrender and release. It's almost like it's time for you to rest, maybe recover from this last couple of years. And it's time for you to to prioritize self-care. That would be one way I would see the lunar solar eclipses affecting you. Because that solar eclipse is on the 14th, is happening in the 6th house, Cancer and Cancer rising, I would say you really want to get your health, your checkups. Oftentimes an eclipse in the 6th house can mean a health issue that you've been ignoring comes up. So it's a good time to take a look at your health. The Jupiter-Saturn in this 8th house is really about your relationships, your intimate relationships, the areas where you share resources. So this could be a time where you're being supported by someone else. It could be a time when you are receiving funds that you don't earn. So maybe you get a loan, maybe you get a tax return, an inheritance, and this inheritance, tax return, governmental support carries you through the whole year. But it's not a bad thing to have, really. It could be that you get an opportunity this year to take a break from the heavy lifting that you've done for the last year, year and a half, and really like kind of float a bit, um, and allow other people to support you. I think that might be a big theme. Um, what else do I want to say about that? The lunar eclipse, the north node eclipses happening in that 12th house are also very much about your spiritual self and your connection to the divine. So, along with these ideas of surrender, come this focus on, you know, where do I find reverence? Where do I um, let the light in? And how do I connect with that spirit, God, goddess, all that is? How can I re-engage with that part of my life? Um, and that becomes a pretty big theme around this Monday lunar eclipse. It highlights where you are spiritually aligned, and it highlights the areas where you might have given up and need to revisit. Um, that 12th house is sort of the house of self undoing. And so having a lunar eclipse there can be the place where you are sabotaging yourself. And so the lunar eclipse can kind of highlight the ways that that might be happening so that you can change that behavior. Any questions around any of that, Cancer folks? Hi, Stacy. Um, so I'm going to move on to Leos and Leo rising because I know we've got a couple of those beautiful Leos on the call. So Leo and Leo rising, these shifts are really in alignment with your decan because their air and fire are really working with the fire and air in your chart. The eclipse cycle is in the area of your alliances. So these are networks, people, friends, people who you've met over through your professional endeavors. And this is about your goals, what you want to achieve and how you want to get there, and your creative spirit, your creative voice, your authentic self. So this is a really exciting place to have these eclipses because it lights up all of these new contacts that can help you achieve your goals. So it's really you reaching out more and inviting people in, and even people finding you, all of your effort over the last year and a half of all that Capricorn in the 6th house, where you're just looking with a microscope at how you work and what you offer and how do you package it and how do you get your routines, your work routines down so that they are serving you and you're not a slave to your job. And all of that part of it is done now. And now you can kind of it's like the wind is at your back and you've gotten that momentum going. And now you just have to be open and remain open and feel entitled to allowing these people to come in and find you because you've seeded a lot of that ground. You've done the hard work. Now, with the Jupiter-Saturn moving above the horizon, this really feels like a time where your tribe is going to find you, those people, those clients, those your audience, the people that you have been working so hard to serve are now going to start showing up and paying you back or supporting you, without as much effort, I think is what I want to say, without as much effort. So that's a positive. It does require you to engage with that inner child at times, because it's activating the 5th house, and it's activating the 5th house with the south node. You want to look at, any issues around entitlement that get triggered. You just want to have compassion for, because I think big things are coming in. And if you are not feeling entitled to those big things, you can sometimes not sabotage so much, but go into old ways of managing those habitual ways of hiding your light. And so you want to, when that happens, you want to just observe and allow and have compassion for those parts of yourself. And through that process, then you're really able to let the dream be realized. That's the 11th house. It's allowing that dream to be realized um, without sabotaging it in because you don't feel like you deserve it. I think that's the piece. So it's a pretty big year, I think, for the Leo risings, just because of the Saturn Jupiter in the seventh. You're showing up bigger. You're showing up with more expertise in an area that you've worked 19 years. Well, actually more than that. 15 years for one cycle, but 30 years another cycle. Saturn is a heavy lifting, heavy planet, and it's been underground for you for the last 15 years. And now you're coming back. You're coming back. It's like a comeback. Yeah, could say that. As a Leo rising, I definitely like that vibe. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to move on to Virgo, because I know we've got a couple Virgo risings, three, in fact, if they're all on the call. Virgo. Okay. And I'm just going to take a glimpse at all of I can't really see everybody on the call, but hi, Lori. Hi, Sheena. Hi, Crystal, Alex, Ashley. There you are. Peggy. I just want to say Amy, PJ, Bridget, Holly, Ann. I'm so glad you all joined. Sylvia. Okay. All right. So let's get back to Virgo and Virgo rising. So this is a big shift for Virgos. It's really more in the realm of career and home, because these eclipses are happening on an angle, really important angle for Virgos and Virgo rising. So you may see a relocation in the next year and a half. You may see some success happening, professional success that you haven't seen in 19 years, because your North Node is at the top of the chart. Now, some Leo risings will have this as well if you're using a different chart system. But Gemini on the midheaven is really getting lit up, and this eclipse on Monday is like a spotlight that the movie theaters used to have. Like it's like the spotlight shining out into the ethers for you. So people are beginning to find you, Virgo, and they're going to start showing up in the next 6 months in a bigger way. And in addition to that, your workload is going to increase. And that's a good thing. It's in a nice alignment with your earning power. So whatever the career thing that's happening, something maybe surprising, maybe something you didn't anticipate coming online career-wise that requires some adjustment at home, and really require a change in your day-to-day work life, but for the better. So it's increased work, but it's more visibility and it's more money. And I'm saying that because of Jupiter in a nice alignment with the second house for Virgos and Virgo rising. And that South Node in the fourth house. So this is where I think if you're inclined to relocate, if you're inclined to sell property, where you might see that happening. If not, then it could be just a change in your living environment. Maybe you get rid of a bunch of stuff and you have more space in your home. Maybe it's definitely an ending though. It's like an end cycle in the home and in the home situation, which is freeing you up to do more professionally. So, one example of this I could see is maybe your family doesn't need you as much as they used to. And so you're able to really shine out your light professionally. Maybe you relocate to a more affordable place and are able to go more gangbusters in the day-to-day work life without like maybe you don't have to earn as much, so it's more fun and you're enjoying your routines more. That's another way it could manifest. Because the eclipses are in a square aspect to your rising sign, and the Jupiter Saturn are in a square or in a weird alignment called a quincunx. So there are adjustments and there is tension. There's good with there's some a little bit, I don't want to say bad, a little bit of tension with the good stuff coming in. So it requires adjustment, it requires patience, and it requires you to really look at your routines in a new way. So the big shift, the big paradigm shift that's happening is with your routines in your day-to-day life and your health and well-being. I think, this is the way that, Virgos are extremely health conscious. Having that Jupiter Saturn in the sixth house, you may be getting into shape in a different way. You may be taking different supplements or find a new regimen that works for you. But for the next couple of years, you're going to be really focused on your routines, on your work style, your work habits, and on taking care of your health. So I'll give you an example, because I had this alignment last year that I realized what was causing my migraines, and I got medication for it. And I realized I had to look at my diet in a different way, and things like that, where some problem you've been experiencing that you've been kind of ignoring or just sort of dealing with, you just can't ignore anymore and you need to address. So it doesn't have to be some life or death dramatic situation, but it is an adjustment, and it is requiring more attention. But overall, I think for Virgo risings, it's an exciting time professionally, particularly. So you can expect some news to drop this month. After that, in December, basically in December. But on Monday, you have that eclipse there, and that can bring some things to light professionally, some opportunities. So that's exciting for Virgos. I'm going to move on to Libras. And if anybody has any questions, just I forgot to say this, just butt in, because I can't fit everybody's window on my screen. So you'll just have to interrupt me so I know. Okay, so Libras and Libra risings. This is in a really positive, that the changes coming this month and through next year are positive for Libra rising. Much easier year than this year for Libras. The big thing happening is that lunar eclipse in the ninth house. This is a shift in perspective. This is having a bigger, broader worldview. It could also be broadening your horizons. It could be that you have a brainstorm and suddenly have an idea that can shift your whole paradigm. That could be coming for you this month. And it also could be that something international or cross-cultural comes in and invites you and has an opportunity for you. The shift of Jupiter Saturn into the fifth house, this is really a lot more fun. Jupiter and Saturn together, it's like structured fun. It's like maybe work fun. So maybe you're able to take that hard work and the pursuit that you spent so much time on. Maybe you've been renovating your house, or you've been relocating, or the home life has been very filled with responsibilities and work, and that shifts into an area that's like, oh, okay, well, so now I can be creative. Now I don't have to be always committed to some family member or my home. Now I can actually use my ability to get organized and use that in a fun way. So if you have kids, this could be a preoccupation with the children, and maybe spending more time with them, is a responsibility, but it's also more fun. It could also be if it's a creative endeavor you've been working on, or that you've been kind of, the Saturn transit through that fourth house for Libra has probably been about digging into your psyche, into your baggage, into your upbringing and your history and your ancestry. And that's a very heavy, heavy time. When Saturn leaves that orb and it goes into Aquarius in the fifth house, then you're looking at, oh, well, now I know what I can do with all of this new self knowledge. I can use this in my new creative endeavor. I can use this in my own self expression. I can be more authentically myself because I've released something, really, some core wound has been healed. It's been a heavy year for Libras, and this shift can be a shift toward more lightness. That I can see for sure. Any questions around any of that? What else do I want to say about that? Jupiter and Saturn. So this is also social activity. Libras are pretty social creatures. I do think that because the Jupiter Saturn will be squaring some financial houses, that's going to be an area of tension and change and decision making. So it doesn't, square aspects don't have to be terrible. They just require you're taking action and making decisions. It's not an easy flow. It's a little bit more heavy lifting where earning capacity is concerned. But it's, you're a much more lighthearted person in 2021 than you've been in 2020. That's for sure. And hopefully we all will be. All right, I'm going to move on to, I don't think Andy is still here. Let's see. Oh, there's one Sag rising, I think, on the call. I'll do this. Oh, there you are. Okay. So let's do Sag and Sag rising.
The Scorpio.
Oh, is there a Scorpio? I'm sorry, Lisa. Okay, let's do Scorpio.
That little voice was like, what?
Sorry. Okay, so Scorpio and Scorpio rising. I'm still figuring out like the structure of these calls so I can get everybody in. I think this is probably it, where I just do the rising signs and do everybody that way. All right, so Scorpio, the Jupiter Saturn moves into the bottom of the chart. So this is a really significant time because it's the deepest part of your psyche, and it's a very deep part of your journey. So the way that Saturn works is every quarter of the chart is about, let's see, 7.5 years. And so you've gotten to a cycle that you've journeyed down into the depths of who you are, and now from this moment on you begin to journey upward into a new way of being. This next year, though, is a very psychologically rich time where you're able to sort of mine the depths of where you've been, where you're going, how you were raised, and how that reflects into the person you've become, your character, your the whole bag of tricks, the fears and the challenges, the strengths and the gifts. All of that gets really focused on. So it's a great time to go into therapy. It's also a good time to look at your home life, where you physically live, and decide whether that's sustainable long term. Because this is in a square aspect to Scorpio, this is a time of choices, making choices about the foundation of your life, the systems of your life, and determining what works and what doesn't. I do think having these two planets in the house of real estate make it a pretty good time to consider selling. Having Jupiter in the fourth house is a good time to try and renovate and sell if that's something you have to do. Although, as all of you know, I would want to do that in a private session to get the best dates, but generally speaking, you'll see a lot of activity in the home when you have these two planets in that place. The eclipse cycle is happening in the financial areas for Scorpio and Scorpio rising. And this is really looking at your earning power and deciding what needs to go in terms of your expenses. How can you change what you're spending so that it isn't draining your funds, and how you can share your resources. What areas of your finances can be supported by someone else? Maybe you refinance. This would be actually a good year to refinance with the North Node in the 8th house. A time of looking at your shared resources and figuring out where is the biggest deficit for you. How is the give and take balanced? Are you being paid what you're worth? And what part of your finances and your expenses can be shared? Those would be things that I would look at. The other thing is, this is a time of inheritances, again, that tax refunds, money from the government to support you. Having the North Node in that 8th house is an area of opportunity. So applying for loans, applying for support, government support, these would be things that you might want to consider in the next year. But generally speaking, I would say that the tension and the heaviness that's weighed you down in your decision making in the last year it moves into a place of more, I want to say urgency. So it's like you've been thinking about something for a long time, and there's something that shifts in this month. It's like, oh, I now see what the action is I have to take. I've been doing all this contemplation around this thing, and now I'm ready to actually take action. So that's some way that you could see this. And this, because that Saturn is going to square off Uranus for you, Scorpio rising, it could be partnership issues. So whether those are marital partnership, life partnership, or business partnership, that there's something going on there that's going to need to have action taken. And this, maybe it's related to the financial arrangements, but these are, it's a year of some adjustments, I would say, adjustments financially that could actually benefit you, where you're spending less, but receiving more. And then there's another area of, am I aligned in the right partnership? How does that partnership need to be adjusted and changed so it's more sustainable? So that's kind of how I would see Scorpio and Scorpio rising. I hope that's helpful. Let's do Sag. Okay, so Sag, rising Sag, we're looking at, again, this axis of identity and your relationship, your public self, your public relations, and your identity. These are big themes. How am I showing up? Is the habitual way I have shown up sustainable? Is this really who I am? And do people see me as I want to be seen? Am I in the right partnerships? How do my partnerships need to change? This is actually a really beneficial alignment for new partnerships. Having the North Node transiting that 7th house can be very beneficial for aligning yourself with someone else who can be supportive in your efforts to sort of peel away the layer and identity in a way that feels more authentically you. I mean, there is a piece of you that is being shed during this cycle because of the South Node near the Sun, or the South Node on the 1st house, Sag or Sag rising. So it's a time of transition in that you are releasing some parts of yourself that have become habitual, but that are actually not really authentic. The other piece of this is that Jupiter and Saturn move into the third house in a nice alignment with your decan. And that's ideas. I mean, it's an amazing year for breakthrough ideas for Sag and Sag rising. It's a time where you may get your arms around your ideas in a way that can actually help you excel or level up or expand your horizons, because Jupiter is in an Aquarius, and that's such an inventive, creative placement that's so compatible with Sagittarius energy. Um, it could also be your associations, your neighborhood, your local community, that they somehow become more a part of your day to day. They become more involved, or they sort of rope you into their activities. It's a social placement. So even though we're in, lockdown, even though it's not a social time, there is a way, and this could be technology, this could be you being more engaged even on Zoom, because the third house is ruled, that's sort of like the tech house. It definitely feels like you're finding inventive ways to engage with your community. And again, Sag, generally speaking, there's a little bit of an activist side to all Sagittarius folks. With Aquarius coming in and really amplifying that, you could find yourself involved in some sort of grassroots activism. That may be one way it shows up. Um, but it's a positive, and it definitely feels like a lift, and that third house is sort of where how we think about our lives, how we think about ourselves, our perspective, and that's definitely a more optimistic placement than we've had. So rather than the heaviness, and even for a lot of Sag, a lack of confidence, because Saturn has been in that second house for so long, that having that Saturn leave that orb and be in a complementary sign is like, oh, I actually feel more effective than I used to, and I feel better about myself and my place in the world. So all of those are really good. I think that kind of encapsulates where we're at. The big change, the big like thing that requires adjustment is your issues of identity versus partnership, the balance of you and the other. That's really the way these eclipses are showing up in your chart. You have any questions, Andy? Anybody? No? Okay. All right, so let's go on to my favorite sign of all, the Capricorns. Okay, so Capricorn and Capricorn rising. There you are. Oh, goodness. There are a few Capricorns on this call that are my favorites. Capricorn and Capricorn rising, you guys have had such an intense year because of all that stuff, that Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. And now Jupiter, the big thing is Jupiter moving into the second is really helpful. With your ruler, Saturn, in the second, it's a little bit more measured in its optimism, a little bit more measured in its abundance. But, Capricorns probably prefer that, honestly, because there's a lot of need for it to sort of go at a steady pace. I think the shift for you of Jupiter Saturn into the second will in some ways feel stabilizing. It will be in a trine aspect to your midheaven. So your earning power could increase. It could increase at a reasonable pace, though, with Saturn right next to it. It's not like necessarily gangbusters, but certainly better than this year. So you could feel more effective. You could feel more, have more confidence. And you could also feel more motivated really to generate income, that becomes a focus much more. And that's saying a lot for Capricorns because they are very money minded. They're really aware of what they are earning, what they're bringing in, what they're saving. So I think your focus does turn to those areas of, how am I earning my living? Am I earning enough? Where are the areas that need to be restructured financially so that my professional life is more sustainable? All these Saturn words. So it's like you do gain more money, but you're maybe more mindful about how you spend it and more mindful about the expenditures that you make are contributing to your stability. So these are all great things that Capricorn values. Um, there is a sense that your values are changing. Saturn moves through a new sign every 2.5 years, Saturn being your ruler. And when Saturn moves into a new sign into your second house of values, it's like, oh, what do I value and what am I doing in my day to day life that reflects that? That becomes a really big theme with this eclipse cycle because for Capricorn and Capricorn rising, it's the eclipses happening in the sixth house where your routines live, where your habits live, where your day to day life is. And that's an area of dynamic change, dynamic shift, and positive growth because it's a North Node eclipse series in that sixth house. So your health and well being could be very good this year. That's one of the things I could see happening, that you either reinvest in yourself and your own health, and that you end up feeling great as a result. And also that you're releasing and letting go of maybe some ways that you have in the past sabotaged yourself, and now you're maybe feeling more entitled. I think that's another way this could manifest because Capricorns in general are quite they can carry that load, that burden for a very long time. They can sustain a period of lack for a very long time. And with Jupiter moving into the second and the North Node in the sixth, it could just be like you're finally feeling more entitled to more abundance, entitled to feeling like you deserve some nice things, um, and that you are feeling I guess because Saturn is there, it gives you like a feeling like it's not too much, that it's just enough, like feeling like this is enough for me to be satisfied. And I'm gonna let myself enjoy it. That's another big piece for Capricorn that doesn't always come naturally, is just being able to just like really revel in your successes or really recognize your successes. And so this could be a good year for all of those kinds of things. I mean, the big piece is that it's in a nice alignment to the rest of your chart, that your professional life, your home life, your health and well-being, and your sense of yourself, your self-confidence, all of those pieces um, light up and feel invigorated this coming year. Um, Yeah, so that's good news. Any questions for, yeah, get the success going, get ready, set your watches for the abundance and the good news, because that's the whole schedule that's coming. Um, any questions on any of that? No? Okay. I'm gonna go to Aquarius. We have a couple Aquarius risings. Yeah, so I didn't really skip anybody but Taurus. Okay, so Aquarius, this is your year. And it's because Saturn and Jupiter in the first house. If you have an Aquarius sun, they're lining up on the sun. It's a very big shift that is about to happen in the way that you see yourself, in the way that you identify in the world, and the connections that you are making to the outside world. So really having to kind of take that leap of faith and trust that you know everything you need to know by this point, and go ahead and be the authority on something, you know, because you have Jupiter and Saturn right there in the beginning of your chart. So people are going to be looking to you for some specific kind of innovation. This is for a lot of Aquarians. I like to think of this as that moment where you can really fly your freak flag. You can be the weirdo you came here to be. And I don't really like using that weirdo term, being an Aquarius myself. It's like unconventional. That sounds nicer. Like you're the kind of person who thinks outside the box, and most of the time you're ahead of the culture. But this is going to be one of those beautiful and very unique moments where what you have is exactly what the culture is demanding. So it's a good time for Aquariuses to sort of go for it this coming year, to really put it out there, to show up in your authentic self, to know that, you know, to have the confidence that what you have to offer is exactly what people want right now. And don't spend a lot of time in feeling that. I think sometimes Aquarians tend to over associate with that feeling of alienation. Like they've spent most of their lives feeling like they're on the outside looking in. And then this is a time where you're kind of like, I don't know, there's just your unique kind of vibration, frequency, offering, way of thinking is exactly what everyone is needing, and they may not even know it yet. So there's that. That's a big thing. Now, what this requires of you is a good deal of effort at the same time, because it's in a square alignment to your midheaven, or a square alignment to the bottom of your chart, where you physically live. Adjustments are definitely going to have to be made. And people are going to leave your life that aren't aligned with this. And that may not feel great for Aquarians. They tend to like to be popular. You know, yes, they are accustomed to being outsiders, but there's another piece of Aquarius that really does yearn for acceptance. And so with the eclipses happening, the South node eclipse happening in the 11th house, this is like changing goals, letting go of some goals to bring in others, but also some alliances that are really just not working. They're going to have to be released this year, because this year is really all about you celebrating who you are authentically in a much bigger way than you probably ever have at any one moment in your life. Like really being who you are fully, unapologetically, and being embraced for that. Um, the North Node eclipses in that fifth house are all about creativity, about self expression, about honoring that essence of self. I like to say it's the inner child, because that's kind of that little being that we are before we get corrupted by the world. I feel like that lives in the fifth house. And that's the place of you that really gets lit up this year. And in concert with that Jupiter Saturn alignment, it can feel really like a huge gust of oxygen into your system, and it can be kind of heady even, and create a little bit of dizziness, and not altogether pleasant all the time, because you're having to like fully inhabit an identity that in a way and on a scale maybe that you've never had to do. So it's big. It's definitely big. And it does require you to acknowledge not everybody's going to be on board with this, and that's okay. Um, okay. Anybody questions on any of that? I'm going to do Pisces because I do have a couple of Pisces folks on the call. And then we're going to call it a day. Okay. So Pisces and Pisces rising, this is significant time for you too. Anybody that is a mutable sign is affected strongly by the eclipses. So that's, you can see it reflected on the chart. All of these on the angles here are mutable signs: Gemini, Sag, Virgo, Pisces. So eclipses on angles are more noticeable because these are sort of core parts of your personality. The ones in between, they're important, but they're not as important as where you live, what you do for a living, who you are, and who you're in relationship with. Those are all the big ones. And Pisces, you're feeling these eclipses in the where you live and what you do area the most. So the eclipse is the north node, the happier part of the eclipse, is in the area of where you physically live, your house, your family, your upbringing, your ancestry, your feelings about all of those things. That really gets highlighted on Monday when we have the north node eclipse, lunar eclipse in that fourth house. It could be that you're ready to change or modify, highlight, the things about where you live. It could also be, so maybe it's a relocation, maybe it's just redecorating. It could also be that you're dealing with a family issue, maybe with your mom. The mother is usually indicated by the moon being in that part of the chart. Maybe your mom needs some attention, some focus. Maybe her health and well-being is at being challenged. Although with the north node there, it's obviously okay. Now the south node on the midheaven or in the 10th house, that's where there's the adjustment that needs to be made. And this could be a change in your reputation, modifying how you are known publicly. So changing up the way that you are professionally known, letting go of one professional identity because it doesn't feel authentic any longer, and stepping into a new public role. With Jupiter and Saturn for Pisces moving into that deep 12th house, with the combination of this Jupiter, Saturn into the 12th and the North Node eclipses in the fourth, this for Pisces and Pisces rising does feel like a very contemplative year coming up. Not that you're not going to have moments of achievement, but that there's a lot of deep inner spiritual work that you're going to be focused on in the coming year. And this is, in terms of spiritual work, it's like once in a lifetime spiritual work. It's like epiphanies on a grand scale and a restructuring of your idea of divine. Now, Jupiter Saturn could also mean that you want to spend more time alone in the year, or that you need more time to gather yourself. Pisces is generally a pretty introspective sign, and I want to say, I wouldn't want it to dip into melancholy, particularly since Neptune has been floating around in that first house or on your sun and can cause a lot of confusion. With Jupiter, Saturn in the 12th, I actually feel like you're going to get clarity on some things that have been extremely confusing about identity. I think that's one of the things that the lunar eclipse this Monday can very much clarify, shining a light on who you are at your core, at your essence, and giving you the time and the freedom next year, starting with that winter solstice shift, to kind of spend time with yourself in a way that feels like renewing faith in yourself or in something bigger than you, and restructuring. These are Saturn and Jupiter words. Restructuring and letting go of something that has been a little bit of an albatross. I feel like this might have to do with some friends or associations or a tribe you belong to in some way that you're ready to be done with, but that leaving will require some grieving, will require some attention to. It's not just like you can just get up and walk out, that it's a little bit more complicated than that. But nevertheless, it's an important part of your journey and a really important part of your personal, you know, honoring your personal growth and that soul. It's like deep soul work that the 12th house and the fourth house together bring to you in the next year. So it maybe isn't as glamorous as some of the other ways this Jupiter Saturn could show up, but it's nevertheless deeply important. And it leads you to, in the end of May and the beginning of June, a kind of a transcendent moment that you will really, really grasp 2022 timeframe. So you have Jupiter and Saturn in what is the Pisces house, the 12th house, the last house. You're ending some cycles in the next 2 years. But you're ending them because you're about to make a huge debut. So if you can think of it that way, then maybe it's less melancholy or maudlin, but at the same time, I think this could be a breakthrough. That Saturn Jupiter is going to square Uranus in the third all next year as well. So epiphanies are not even really getting to the heart of what that can feel like. It's much more, it's crackling breakthrough kind of energy, but it's breaking through on an interior level so that when we move forward into 2022, 2023, those outward expressions of breakthrough become much more evident. So I think that's enough for Pisces. And I think we're about, at 2 hours here. Does anybody have any questions on anything we covered or any of the prior presentation? Anyone? Okay. So I think I may have successfully recorded this so that it will be easy to listen to again. If any of you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to just drop me an email. And I will be downloading this and sending it out to everyone for replays. Have a great lunar eclipse on Monday, and everybody stay in touch. And thank you very much for joining on this weekend. It was really good to connect. It's really exciting to see all of you each month like this. I think it's just very invigorating for me personally, and I hope that you're feeling connected too. So stay tuned for the next one and have a great weekend. All right.
Thanks, Gina.